big boxing debate. I'm joined by Andy Clarke, presenter, commentator, host of Macklin's Take. Andy, how are you, mate?
Yeah, good, good. Life is it's Groundhog Day, isn't it, most days? But we're used to that. Bit bored, to be honest. But, I can't complain too much.
It's a bit boring, but I tell you what, there's a lot of boxing stories at the moment, plenty of us to crack on with, and there should be some good, lively debate to be had here. So I know that you've got some very, very strong opinions. So I'm hoping that I can sort of fish it out of you.
Yeah, be my guest.
So we'll get started straight away. So we're going to go with Canelo versus Callum Smith. We've got 8 minutes, so every debate we have 8 minutes, and nothing really happens at the end. But viewers are more than welcome to comment and let us know what they feel about the subjects. Hopefully, we disagree on most of them because then it'll be much more entertaining television or streaming. And yeah, I think it should be pretty fun. Canelo versus Callum Smith happening on December the 19th. Is that right? That's correct. Yeah, Andy knows. Andy's a boxing geek, so he'll know far more than me on all these subjects. But yeah, that's going to be a great fight, and there's plenty of debate to be had. So without further ado, we are going to get cracking, and here we go. I'm going to put a statement out there straight away. Last year, Callum Smith got beaten by John Ryder in his own backyard. He got beaten up. He didn't lose, but he got beaten up. Andy, over to you.
Well, I commentated on that fight with Andy Lee, and I had it basically being all on the final round. I thought it was really, really close going into the final round. I think Andy scored it just for Callum Smith at the end. I didn't think there was any great scream up to be had about the fact that he got the win. It was just that the cards were too wide, and he did get a lot of criticism after that fight. John Ryder was terrific, had a great plan, put it into practice, executed it really well. But I do think that Callum's one of these fighters who kind of he's a big occasion sort of performer, I think, anyway. You look at fights like the British title fight he had against Rocky Fielding. Now, he proved himself to be above that level subsequently, but he won that in the first round. And against George Groves as well, when he really needed to step up, he did it. So I do think he will raise his level against Canelo. But having said that, when you look at what Canelo's achieved, it is difficult to see Callum Smith winning that fight because you're going to have to beat him comprehensively on points, I think, to get the decision against Canelo in Nevada. I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement, or you're going to have to knock him out. I don't see any sign really that anyone is capable of knocking Canelo out because he took some huge shots off Golovkin at the weight below, admittedly, but he's shown that he definitely does have a chin, and I've never even really seen him hurt. And they reckon now, his team, that super middleweight is his best weight. So Callum Smith's got a massive tall order on his hands, and personally, I don't see him winning that fight. To be honest.
I'm going to agree with you completely. But one thing I would say, you told about the big occasions, and granted, he's had some big nights that are important to his career and his future. But what I would say, if you look at his record, I don't think any of those opponents, obviously he fought George Groves, but in this sort of basically semi-retired, had a bad shoulder. None of his opponents come close to the level of Canelo, and I just don't. Big performer on the big occasion or not, I just don't think he's got the experience or the ability to. Personally, I think Canelo's going to knock him out to the body. That's what I'm calling it.
Well, I mean that could happen. That could happen because Canelo's. There's no debate about the quality of Canelo. I mean, people have their own thoughts on those two fights against Golovkin. I thought Golovkin was very unlucky to come out of those two fights with just a draw and a defeat. I didn't think that was a real fair reflection on what he put into those two fights. I know the way that boxing is scored, often you don't get that much change for what you put in. But I thought he won the first fight. The second fight, I didn't have any problem with that going Canelo's way, but I thought Golovkin won the first fight. And you look down that resume of the fighters that he's taken on. He's taken some difficult, tricky jobs that you wouldn't necessarily have thought he would. Erislandy Lara, for example, springs to mind. And I thought the performance against Kovalev was a really good performance because the The reports of Kovalev's demise, I thought, were greatly exaggerated. I know that he got beaten by later
It's
Alvarez, but
it's
then
a
came
tough
back
one.
to beat him. And people looked at the fight against Anthony Yarde because he was out on his feet in the eighth round of that fight. But
I think a lot of the rumours came because people within boxing know that Kovalev probably doesn't keep himself in the best physical condition outside of a fight camp.
yeah, I think, yeah, yeah. I mean, there are all sorts of reports about what he gets up to between fights and his refueling activities, if you like. But the fact was that I had him down going into that. I think it was the 10th round that he stopped him in the 10th or the 11th. I had him down, Canelo, because I covered that fight with Enzo Mack, and he had him down as well. But he stayed patient, and then he knocked him out, and that was, that was up at light heavyweight. So as I said, they do feel like he's bedded in now at his best weight, which is super middleweight. And you look at the skill set, and he's still getting better. I think that's the thing. I mean, he
What
turned pro when he was 15. He's had so many fights.
what worries me for Callum Smith is you take that Ryder fight, and what Ryder did well was on the inside slipping. That he had great head movement that night, and Smith wasn't catching him that easily. So then you up that to someone who's the same height pretty much. I think Canelo's an inch smaller than him. So then his level of head movement and his defense on the inside compared to John Ryder. If Callum Smith struggles against that, it worries me against Canelo. I'm honestly, I'm sure if Joe Gallagher watches this, he'll kill me. But I don't give him a hope.
Well, what John Ryder did really well in that fight was he backed him up to the ropes, and he pushed him back into the ropes and gave him absolutely no room to do anything, but had just enough room to work himself. That was the clever thing about it. Sometimes he was right above us, and he was just pushing him back into the ropes, and he just didn't have any room to work. And Canelo, you're right, does have the same kind of stature. I think he's only 5'8". He's capable of slipping shots on the way in. He's just a very, very good all-round fighter. You can't really see any chinks in that armor at all, to be honest. So it's just, I mean, it's a massive job for Callum Smith. It's the biggest fight in boxing, getting Canelo, and we're at a point now where things seem to be announced later and later all the time. Ideally, this kind of fight, you'd have a good kind of 3-month lead time on it, but we know that Smith has been training. He's been expecting something to happen, so I don't see that particularly being an issue. And this is the fight that every super middleweight should want. So, nothing ventured, nothing gained. But personally, yeah, I do find it very difficult to see him winning.
Poor Callum, we're not giving him a hope. I suppose what is the argument for him? He's got the reach. If he can prevent himself from being pushed back on the ropes like what Ryder did, then and he manages to keep it at range, he probably will win a lot of the rounds early on. Same way that sort of you saw Kovalev winning the rounds against Canelo. So I suppose there's that argument. Does he have the ability to knock him out? I know you talked about Canelo's chin. I personally I can't see it. Could you make an argument for Callum knocking him out?
No, no, I don't think I could. He's got the physical advantage of the height and reach, like you say, and he has to try and utilise those. And he is a very good boxer, Callum Smith. He's very well schooled. He has had good amateur pedigree himself. Was desperately unlucky not to qualify for London 2012, and he's done everything that's been asked of him so far. But Canelo is another level altogether. For me, he's the best pound for pound. I'm not a massive fan of the pound for pound list. I think it's largely irrelevant in many cases, but it's quite fun to debate, and I would put him at the top of it because he's traversed the weights in recent times. He took those fights against Golovkin. Everybody wanted to see him take the third fight, but obviously that hasn't worked out. And this is the fight for him at super middleweight because Callum Smith is undefeated, as are the rest of them actually, but they don't really seem to be particularly close to fighting each other.
We've got 20 seconds left or 15. So quickly, I'm going Canelo 8th round knockout to the body. What are you going for?
I'm going to go Canelo points.
Points. Safe bet. I'm going risky. So next up, we are going to discuss Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury, specifically their resumes. Those of you who are clued in on the boxing world on social media will know that Eddie Hearn earlier this week said that it makes him laugh when people say Tyson Fury's resume is a lot better than AJ's. We've got 8 minutes and we're going to discuss it. So, Andy, I'll let you kick this one off. Where do you stand?
So with this, basically, it depends on whether you're looking at quality or quantity. With all kind of contentious debates, you can select the data or the stats that support your argument. And Eddie Hearn's argument is that Anthony Joshua has beaten more top 10 heavyweights than Tyson Fury. And if you look back over Joshua's reign as a world champion with that one blip, obviously, against Andy Ruiz, then he has done that. I don't think you could argue against that. But then if you're going to look at the quality aspect of best wins, then Fury's best wins are better than Joshua's best wins. I did the rankings for Sky, and when Fury reactivated as a heavyweight, I still had Joshua at the top of the rankings because the win against Klitschko, amazing though it was a long time ago. When he came back, it was, 3 years previously, late 2015. And it wasn't until Fury beat Wilder earlier in the year that I put him above Joshua in the rankings. I didn't put him above him after the draw with Wilder because even though people felt, and I was one of them, that Fury won that first fight, officially it is a draw. So at that point, I still had Joshua and then Ruiz and then Joshua again ahead of him.
Is that your opinion, or is that just because you're following sort of the rules that you would follow to make those rankings?
I mean, it's a bit of both with that. I mean, generally with me, I go on hard evidence. I go on what people have actually done in the ring. And up until that point, Fury in his comeback had got a draw against Wilder. As I said, never mind what people thought about it. It went down as a draw. So that for me wasn't enough to put him above Joshua. But then when he did what he did to Wilder in the rematch, then that's the best win that anyone's had at heavyweight, outside of Andy Ruiz against Joshua. But in the meantime, Andy Ruiz had then lost to Joshua in the rematch. So for me, Fury does go above Joshua in the rankings because also when he got that win against Wilder in the second fight, in a sense, if you like, that kind of reactivates that first win against Klitschko. That then becomes part of the story again. And his two best wins, going to Germany to beat Klitschko and going to America to beat Wilder, they are better than any of Joshua's wins.
Yeah. What I don't like about Fury's record and what I like about AJ's record is if you look at AJ's record, Dillian White onwards, he's never really had a soft touch. You could have, if he did fight Jarrell Miller, probably would have been a soft touch. He fought Ruiz, and a lot of maybe your casual boxing fans said, "Oh, he's got to beat him easily." But a lot of the talking within the trade were, "Why is he taking this fight? It doesn't sell." Like Andy Ruiz's look doesn't sell, but he can also box, so it's kind of a no-win situation. But Joshua has consistently fought fighters of a decent level, and this is what Eddie Hearn's argument is as well. Is there's no Tom Schwartz, there's no Otto Wallin, people who have been plucked out of nowhere, risen up the rankings suddenly, and they're challenging Tyson Fury for his position in the heavyweight rankings, I suppose. So for me, I definitely side with AJ from that point onwards. I think it's a different argument if you go 16 and below, and you look at Fury, fought John McDermott twice, beat Chisora twice, who is still, I would say, a top 10 heavyweight at least after his performance against Usyk. So if you set, I know it's being middle of the road, I would separate it and say early on Fury, back end Joshua, despite the fact he's not got the two megastar wins that Tyson Fury has.
That's true. And with regard to the top 10 opponents that he's faced, Joshua has faced more. But I do think if you're going to look at purely at resumes, then some of it becomes redundant because it's just too long ago. And when you're going to look at rankings, then you have to look at what's happened recently. As far as I'm concerned, you have to look at a recent body of work. And that win in the USA against Wilder was massive. And it wasn't just the fact that he won, it was the manner of the victory. He absolutely destroyed him. He took him apart. He did something that nobody thought that he could do, that nobody thought he could do that. I didn't think he could do that. I thought all the talk about going to knock him out, even though the evidence that he was planning to do it was there because of the change in the training team, I didn't think he could do that. And I just remember sitting at home watching that fight and just thinking after 2 rounds, even before he knocked him down, just thinking, wow, this is over. You know,
It
he's just
was.
walking him down. He's landing at will, and that they just need to fight those two. It's as simple as that. They just need to fight, and then we will get our answer. But at the minute, I do have Fury above Joshua because of what he did against Wilder.
I think it's a tough one because it's, if we are looking at it just as resumes, I'm going to give it to Joshua just because I think, and we are talking purely on paper here, what it looks, if you go on BoxRec and you don't know anything about boxing, but you know this guy's where they're ranked, etc. I'd say you would look at Joshua's and you'd think he's got the better resume. I mean, the matchup of styles for me between AJ and Fury is so exciting because I don't know, I have no idea what comes out on top. Whereas Fury Wilder was almost predictable there, well, before the second fight, that it was going to go. So if Wilder can land, he'll win. If he doesn't land, he won't win. No one expected the knockout from Fury, but he did. But regardless, it was whether, the question was, can Wilder knock out Fury? That's it.
Yeah, if you tracked their resumes, say since Fury came back, and allocated a certain number of points in a kind of algorithm, which is what BoxRec do. I don't know who's top of the BoxRec rankings, but they do it by an algorithm, basically, don't they? And I don't know how they do it, but if you worked out how many points you would get for which opponent you faced over that period of time, then I would say it would be Joshua probably would have the upper hand because Fury's not going to get anything for beating Seferi. He's not going to get anything for beating Tom Schwartz or Wallin or Pianetta. He's just not going to get anything for them. He would have got a decent amount of points for Wilder the first time, but he didn't win, despite what people think. He didn't. But you would give him a huge amount of points for the fight against Wilder the second time around. In that period, Joshua has been doing his business and beating everybody who was put in front of him. And I think it's become clear now too that he got a lot of bad press, Joshua and Matchroom, for, you know, they were accused of not wanting to fight Wilder, and then Wilder just admitted recently, didn't he, that he was offered more money to fight Joshua,
Yeah.
and he chose to fight Fury. So that was interesting.
I
But
think they probably just
yeah,
thought that they could go in and walk through Fury, knock him out, and they will take that because it's the easier fight.
yeah, no one will ever convince me that they didn't take that first Fury fight because they thought Fury was finished. They
Yeah.
looked at those first two fights and they just thought, okay, fine, this is a great time to fight him. He is still, I mean, the linear title argument is one which, again, is pretty spurious at times, but he does have that title because he'd never been defeated. If you want to look at it in those kind
Just
of basic terms, but
we're running out of time. I've got to get this out. What annoys me about Fury is that he doesn't perform that well against the people who aren't that great. Like, you look at that against Otto Wallin. I know the cut was so unlucky. He didn't perform all that well. So I don't understand why he wants those fights. It's like, I don't want to see him fight Ajit Caballero. It's like,
Caballo, yeah.
go and fight someone good because you are better. You are at your best when you fight the best. There's undoubtedly, I've never met anyone who rises to an occasion like Tyson Fury. It is insane how good he is at rising to the occasion and just proving everybody wrong.
Agreed. He's a big occasion man, no question.
100%. Well, now we're going to talk about Conor Benn, who's fighting on Saturday night against Sebastian Formella. It's an interesting fight. I'm surprised that they took it, but let's get started and we can. Oh, that's the wrong one. Ignore me. Conor Benn. I'll kick this off. I am very surprised that Conor and Eddie decided to take this fight. A bit like the Andy Ruiz situation. There's not much to gain because Formella is known within maybe the hardcore, but I wouldn't say he's very known amongst the casual fans, who Conor will have a lot of because people see the Ben name and he's got a good profile, he's great personality. I don't think there's much to gain. I think it's going to be a very, very tricky night. And I think he might lose, but I think even if he does, he learns a lot and he can still build back up and become a great, great fighter.
Yeah, I do think it's a difficult fight, but I do think it's a good fight for him as well because he's definitely at that stage, like you say, where he's still learning. He was always going to be under huge pressure when he turned pro because of the surname, and everybody wants to see him, and he's been on TV from the start. and he didn't really have any kind of amateur career. So he's been learning on the job, and he's done well. Formella I saw on a few Sauerland shows 3 or 4 years ago, fighting 6-rounders, and he looked neat and tidy and well organised, good basics, that kind of thing. I didn't think there was anything that looked particularly special about him, and I still think that's probably the case. But he'll pose some problems, certainly, and Conor Benn, I think, will need to be patient. But he has shown in the past that he can do that, because in the second fight against Payno, and I know Payno's no world beater, but he turned out to be a lot better than people thought he would be after that first fight they had. In the second one, he boxed and he got the win. It wasn't wildly exciting, but he did what he needed to do. And I've spent a bit of time with him recently doing some radio work, and he's got his head very much screwed on. He knows where he is in his career. And they were looking for other fights. It looked like Chris Jenkins for the British title might happen. That didn't. He was looking at Samuel Vargas. That didn't happen. He wanted Johnny Garton early in the year, but Johnny Garton then retired. I think this is the kind of fight where if he can get the win, then it will really bring him on. And he knows that he's under a massive amount of pressure, but people need to stop being so worried about defeats, basically. And one of the good things about the last few months is that people are prepared to take hard fights, and you win some and you lose some, and you move on. It's as simple as that.
There was a great tweet by Bet Connolly last week. I think it was in reply to Peter Fury saying that it's great that young fighters are taking challenging fights. I forgot who he was referring to now. It was one of
Doherty.
The fights.
It was Doherty against Cullen.
Fight, yeah. And she tweeted, "I'm here for any young up and coming boxers who want to test themselves," and I want to see more of that as well. And what I love about Ben is he's taken, I wouldn't say he's gone and taken the most risky fights, but he's taken fights that everyone would have considered are above where he's at. And I love watching him. What I want to know though, that what we should discuss is how far can he go? Can he realistically win a world title? Because that's what he wants. He's made that clear. Personally, I think for him to win a world title, he needs good matchmaking, and he's going to have to continue this sort of trend of learning a lot from all the fights that he's getting and stepping up slowly. And if he gets a bit lucky and well matchmade, I could see there's an argument for him maybe winning a world title.
Yeah, I think it could happen. It is down to the matchmaking. Matchmaking is an art. You need to bring fighters on at the right pace. And if he gets another 10 fights under his belt, he's only 24. I think he turned 24 fairly recently. If he has another 10 fights, even if he loses a couple, as long as they're fights that he learns from against decent opponents, and this current crop of welterweights, which is strong, the likes of Crawford and Spence and Pacquiao still somehow, Thurman, Garcia, all of those guys, Porter still knocking around. If he can, they're not going to be there forever, because if he were to box any of them now, they'd beat him. And he knows that. He'd never admit it, but he knows that. He's sensible. The people around him will know that. So they're not going to throw him into a fight like that. He just needs to keep stepping things up and basically just see what happens, because boxing, like a lot of other things, it's about perseverance. It's about will. And if you're willing to do the training, if you're willing to soak it all up and learn, if you're willing to take a few chances, take your licks on occasions and see how you like that, and I think he does have that in his locker. I think he's got the cojones for it. I think he showed that early on against Payno. Then you just never know what you can achieve, and you can't rule it out because it's just far too early.
I would really like to see him, just from a fan's perspective, I'd love to see him fight in a fight against someone else who can bang, who can really, if they land, you got to be worried about it, because he does get caught. And a lot of the fights that people talk about with Ben are the Kellys and people who move well, and I actually want to see someone who's got his style, and I think it could just be who lands first, and that's it, and lights out. And I think there would be no calling it. It would be literally, does Conor land before the opponent, and that's it. I'm trying to think who's a banger at that weight at his level. No one really.
There isn't anyone who immediately springs to mind, to be honest. I think that fight against Vargas would have been a good fight for him, but Vargas took a fight with Virgil Ortiz instead. And to be honest, when I look at Conor Benn's career, given the fact that he basically had no amateur career because he had a handful of amateur fights in Australia where they would admit the standards not the same as it is here, and then he turned pro. I think he's done well because he is learning on the job. He's in the spotlight. There are advantages to having that surname, of course, but he doesn't get too carried away with it. I was talking to him, like I said, doing some radio stuff a while ago, and I just said to him, I said, boxers always have to tread that fine line between self-belief and being a bit deluded. And he kind of picked up on it straight away, and he said, Do you think I'm deluded?" And I said, "Well, no, because you're
It sounds
looking
like
for
you're
a
calling
British."
him deluded.
I know I did a bit. And I said, "No, because you're looking for a British title fight." This was back in July, August time when they were hoping to make that fight with Chris Jenkins. And I said, "You're not, because that's realistic for you. That's a
I would
fight
have
you
liked to
could
seen
win.
that fight.
It would have been an interesting fight because
Mm.
Jenkins is awkward. He's tricky. Yeah, that would have
This
been
is
a
where
good
I
one.
think the matchmaking comes into it, because I think there are people at British level now who cause Conor Benn problems, and I think that's where in some ways he might, if he does beat Formella, he might have really done well to sort of bypass that route. I know he wanted to fight Chris Jenkins, but he might have done well not to go down that route and to go straight to sort of this fringe world level. And I yeah, I think I'm gonna back him to win a world title, because I think his personality is good enough that everyone will back him and get him good
He will get
fights.
And he will get chances too. He will get chances too because of the vehicle he's got behind him. He would become an attractive option for a champion to give a voluntary to. They would
Yeah,
be able to pay the money and get him a voluntary. Some fighters who are good but can't sell tickets, they're not going to be in that category. He will get opportunities. So long as he just keeps progressing, he will get a chance. And it just depends then who's it against, what are the circumstances, because not all world title fights are equal, are they? We know that.
no, he's got to wait a long time as well, because the current champions are. I wouldn't want to face any of them if I was Conor Benn. It's got
No, it'd be too much.
Terence
It'd be too much at
Crawford,
the minute.
yeah.
Far too much.
I mean, but that's the problem. I don't even think in the next 3 years are they going to come down enough and he going to go up enough that he becomes good enough. I would say if he is going to win a world title, he's looking at a good long way.
Yeah, I would agree. But he's 24. He's got the time.
For sure. All right, I'm going to let you start this next one, because for anyone who doesn't know, the WBC have introduced a new weight category called Bridger weight, and it's basically £200 to £224. So in between cruiserweight and heavyweight, the likes of probably David Haye probably would have fit into it, sort of weight wise. Deontay Wilder easily falls into it. Alexander Usyk falls into it quite easily. Even Alexander Povetkin, Michael Hunter. So there's a lot of names who fit into that category. But let's get started, and we'll wait. We could just all sit back, have a beer, and listen to Andy rant for 8 minutes what he thinks about the Bridger weights.
I just think this is a largely pointless weight division, to be honest, because the reason that people step up above cruiserweight, they venture above £200, stick their head above the parapet, is they want to box a heavyweight, because heavyweight is the glory division, the blue ribbon division, and they want the big fights, and they want the big money, and they want the big nights. It's as simple as that. That's what they go up there for. Usyk could still make cruiserweight. He could still do £200. He can knock around there and just defend his titles endlessly. And there are still some good fighters there. Breedis is still there. Dorticos is still there. Although I think Breedis is going to move up. But that's what they want. You look at someone like Michael Hunter. He's calling out everybody. He will have it with anyone because he wants a world title fight, a heavyweight. That's what they all want. They don't want to step up above £200 to box in this new division. Maximum £224. I mean, I guess there's an argument to be made that they might do it to kind of bed themselves in, but at the same time, I don't see any of them going for it. I really, really don't. You mentioned those names there, and if I were them, look at Babic, for example. I mean, we're going to talk about him a little bit later. He is absolutely determined to box a
Yeah.
heavyweight, even though in his last fight he weighed in at cruiserweight, and he got very irate about it today. He's determined to box a heavyweight, and nobody can tell him otherwise. And
I
that's the mindset.
I think where it's useful is if you look at David Haye, Tony Bellew. I'm seem to recall there was a weight. It wasn't they couldn't go as heavy as they wanted to be. I think there was a limit set as to how heavy they could be within the heavyweight division. So basically, a bridgerweight weight. You might tell me I'm wrong. Um, but so that's where it's useful, where you've got to like, I don't know, an Usyk versus Michael Hunter, and Michael Hunter's worried that Usyk's going to add a stone because it massively benefits him. So they fight at bridgerweight. It's still kind of a heavyweight fight, but it's just under this new fancy name. It's hard, it's very hard. I'm trying to defend the other side, and I do think there
I
are
mean,
people.
I think what they should have done, what would have been better would have been, but you need everybody else to fall in line with it. But what would have been better, and I think Tony Bellew actually did suggest this to them because the WBC are big Bellew fans, and I think they asked him for his input. It would have been better if they'd created a new division at 190 pounds and then pushed cruiserweight up, say, to 210.
That's what
And then
everyone's
heavyweight
saying.
was
Yeah.
above. Heavyweight would be above 210. People are saying it because it makes sense, but that's one of the main reasons probably why one of the sanctioning bodies decided not to do it, because they like to be contrary, they like to do their own thing, and the gap between light heavyweight and cruiserweight is a problem, because if you're too heavy for light heavyweight but not big enough for cruiser, then you've got issues. Then you're stuck in no man's land. So it would have been better to see them do that. I just don't see this flying at all. I don't see any of the other sanctioning bodies taking it on. I really don't.
But I do think that's because, like, if you took the commercial aspect out of it, I think there's a good argument for it. I think there are people like Usyk and Hunter that they don't. I know that Usyk's incredible and he does belong at heavyweight, but for the sake of this argument, he doesn't belong at heavyweight because I can't see him knocking out anyone bigger than sort of anyone who's sort of AJ size and upwards. Even like
Yeah, and
I just don't
yeah, I
see
mean,
it.
and that will undoubtedly be a big problem for him. But that's part of the fascination, is that you want to see him in with those big guys to see whether he can bridge that gap with skill. Because what was really interesting about watching him fight Chisora, particularly if you're, I mean, you know what a difference it makes if you're there than if you're watching it on TV. And the real difference between watching that on TV and being there was that I was kind of in a little bit of an elevated position, and you could see from there, firstly, just how small that ring always looks when you've got big lads in there. And secondly, it was much more noticeable how hard he had to work and how agile he had to be to stay away from Chisora. Now, can he do that against a big heavyweight with better feet? I think it's going to be hard for him. I think it's going to be really hard for him. But Bridgerweight's basically just going to become, if it endures, people always talked about cruiserweight being an unfashionable weight and the kind of weight that never really got its props, probably until the last few years, really, with the World Boxing Super Series, because people look at them and just think, I mean, they're just small heavyweights. They're just not, they're not heavyweights, and that's what Bridgerweight is. They're kind of heavyweights, but they're not heavyweights, and it would see some much fairer matches. We would see some really good boxing in
Yeah.
that division between people of similar size,
Imagine
but
Deontay
they
Wilder
don't.
went
That's not
down
what
there.
they want. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, but that's not what they want. It isn't what they want. It's not. It's not what they move up from cruiserweight for. It just isn't.
I just don't think we can underestimate the stubbornness of the WBC, and I think it will. It will. I
I'm
think
not
we'll be
underestimating.
looking back in 20 years, and it will be. We'll be talking about Bridgerweight like it's a normal division, like it's.
Well, I mean, one thing that you could possibly see happening is the World Boxing Super Series. They're going to keep going for season three, and if the money's there that has been previously, maybe they could do it at that weight. Maybe they could talk people into doing it at that weight, and you could round up a really, really good crop of fighters at that weight. And if the money is there for them to fight each other at that weight, then they may well do it. But if the money isn't there, then they won't. It's as simple as that. And the money won't be there unless something like that happens, because we all know where the big money is, and it's in world heavyweight title fights.
It's wouldn't it be great though if they did get a big budget and they could do a big World Boxing Super Series at sort of even if they went like fringe level heavyweights, I would love to see just a tear up between eight of them. like below the sort of top 3 or 4. I'd love to see a World Boxing Super Series be
It'd
put
be
in.
brilliant, and I know it's something that they would really like to do. It just becomes very, very tricky contractually and all the rest of it to get people to agree to it. But you know, the World Boxing Super Series has made people's careers. It's made people's lives. You know, I remember talking to George Groves about it, and he said that the money he got for winning a world title against Fedor Chudinov at Bramall Lane, his signing on fee for the World Boxing Super Series was 19 times more than what he made against Fedor Chudinov. And that's, you know, I heard Ryan Burnett say recently. I watched a program about him having gone into retirement, and he said that the World Boxing Super Series set him up for life, and that would have been his signing on because he brought the world title to the tournament. Very unfortunately, went out early, but the money in the World Boxing Super Series, if it stays anywhere like what it's been, you know, it's a massive draw because that's what they're all in it for. You know, it's prize fighting. It's called that for a reason. Like they're not doing that they're doing it because they want to make as much money as they can. And if there is money there at the Bridgerweight, then then it can then it can work. But and it would take something like WBSS to launch into it for the money to be there, because otherwise it just won't be there.
I just can't see them having that sort of budget again. Back to the Bridger weights very quickly. I'm gonna say that I can see some sort of future for it, just purely because I think there are some people who want to cash in on it and sort of see an easy way of getting a world title, maybe.
Yeah, I mean that's, you know, that the cachet of a world title can't be dismissed, but I don't see it. I don't see it prospering. I don't see it working out. I really don't.
Perfect. Our last subject. This is my favourite subject because I absolutely love him. I am a fully fledged paying member of the Savage Army. I am. If there is a way to pay, I'll find it because it's just. I love this man. He is. I know he is mental, but I just can't get enough of watching the clips of the stuff that he says. And my favourite thing about Alan the Savage Babbage is that he goes in the ring with no care in the world for his defence. He does not give a monkey's what's coming back at him. He just goes in there windmilling and just, I don't know how, but 6 times out of 6 it's worked. I know the quality wasn't incredible, but you would have backed a couple of them to sort of have the sort of wit about them to just go and run around the ring behind the jab, but every single one he's just pummeled and knocked them out. What's your thoughts on the Savage, Andy?
Yeah, he's great to watch. He's a made for TV fighter because he understands that you need to try and sell yourself. And this Alan, as opposed to the Savage Jekyll and Hyde thing he's got going on, is massively entertaining. And I've no doubt that during fight week, a switch flicks because you see that in loads of fighters. Uh, and he's enormously entertaining. I remember when he first surfaced, he had to get a fight in Italy first because they wanted to put him on the white Rivas card, I think, but he couldn't make his. A foreign fighter can't make their debut in
Yeah,
Britain. The British Boxing Board of Control won't allow it because they just feel like they don't know enough about them. So he quickly got a fight in Italy. Then we saw him on that show, and in his post-fight interview with Andy
I
Scott,
just want to
he
smash.
came. I just want to smash, and I remember just looking at Andy after that, just thinking we're going to have a lot of fun with this bloke. His problem is what we were just talking about previously, which is that he's just not at the minute. He's just
he
not big
can't
enough,
even
really.
make.
For
He can't even go
yeah,
above
he's
the
been
cruiserweight limit.
I think 14.9 has been the heaviest that he's weighed, and maybe he could get a little bit above that. But he is not interested in doing anything other than fighting heavyweights. The bigger, the better. And Tom
He is a
Little looks in
nutcase.
good shape. Looks in good shape. Tom Little. He was 18 stone in Saudi, and I think he'll be nearer 17 this time, and that might make a difference. And maybe he will be the one who can get on the jab and put a bit of a dent in Babbage and just stop him relentlessly coming forward. But you can't not like someone like Babbage because we're always talking about
You
how you
say
want
that, but
people who are happy to fight anybody.
he gets so much abuse. Like, I think people like. when you get someone like that, he starts getting built up because like I run social media pages, and when you see clips, it's like you just sit and you've got to clip it up, and you know it will do well because you know it will divide opinion. So naturally, he gets a lot of attention online because everything he says is a great clip. It's clickbait, and it's brilliant.
But
He
that's a
gets
really good
so
lesson, though,
much
isn't it?
abuse.
But
Pardon?
that's a great lesson for other fighters. That's a great lesson for other fighters because you do have to sell yourself. It's part of the job, and it frustrates me sometimes when I see fighters who they will say, "Oh, I leave the promoting to my promoter, I leave the managing to my manager." Then you get other fighters who just take a keen interest in every area of their career. They want to be involved in everything, and that makes complete sense to me. And he is one of them. And you do need to build a profile. And he's got that kind of Eastern European mystique which we've seen with the likes of Lomachenko, we've seen with Usyk. Usyk, I am very feel, and people love that
I wonder if
because it's
they
that
have
kind
their
of
own
air of
version of the
mystery about
Savage
them.
as well.
Yeah, well, but people love it, and credit to him for doing it because it's not the easiest thing in the world to do to try and not necessarily manufacture something, but come up with something that people are going to buy into, whether it's because they like it or whether it's because they hate it. It's the age old thing, isn't it? It's
I
nearly
just
30
think
years since Ben Eubank, and Eubank was the master, and people have been trying to replicate that ever since with varying degrees of success. But if you can do it, then it works.
my thing is, I think that within the boxing world, and people probably won't like me saying this, is that there are a lot of people with chips on their shoulder. A lot of people who see the Babbages, even to another extent, the KSIs, the Logan Pauls, and they're like, why do they make money after I've put all this into being a boxer? But you can't go into any sport and just expect big money. Even in football, if you talk a good game and you are good at promoting yourself, you'll earn more money because you'll get more deals. It's just a matter of how life works. There is a lot of people with this sort of, they feel like they have a right to a lot of money just because they're a good boxer. But if you don't make an effort to sell yourself, you have no right to make tons of money. And for me, like, Babbage makes himself available. He always says stuff that is borderline. He doesn't have a filter. He's not media trained. And as far as I'm concerned, if he goes and keeps getting big fights, I have no problem with it. And honestly, I think he could get an opportunity against someone and just be all have that style. And if they don't fancy it that night, and they've got some sort of, I don't know, European title or something, I wouldn't bet. I don't think I'd bet against him.
No, he's you've got to give people a reason to want to watch you. It's not when you get to professional boxing, it's different. It's a business. You have to sell yourself, and he does that really really well. And as for how good he is, I've got no idea. He got to a good level as an amateur, but he was on a good Croatian team, and other fighters. Marco Chalic kept him out at number one at heavyweight for Croatia, who we saw against Joshua Buatsi. But who's got the higher profile of those two? It's Babic because of what he says and the way he goes about things. And Dillian White obviously saw that. Team White saw that. They looked at him and just thought, okay, we can do something with this guy because he's as game as they come in sparring, and we can get it. British crowds, Eddie Heard will like
Dillian's
him.
quite
British
business
crowds will like
savvy,
him.
I think. He comes
Yeah, of
across
course,
that
of
way.
course. There's a reason for all these fighters that he signs, and yeah, maybe people do want to see Babic get beaten. Maybe people want to see him get beaten by Tom Little on the weekend. But even were that to happen, you know that he's not just going to take his stool and disappear. He'll be back, and that kind of attitude is what it's absolutely what you want. It's 100% what you want. I watched the press conference from earlier today, and he was that was pretty
He was
engaging
coming
because
after
he was
you, I
he was
think.
well. I think you know what I think that's actually Adam Smith. I think that's actually Adam Smith. But I do agree with it. I do agree with it because he was 14-3 in his last fight, and that is going to be a problem. He was calling out Hrgovic, and that would be amazing to see those former Croatian teammates who
I
now
would
don't get
love,
on because Babic feels that he's a
love.
sellout and he's a traitor for not staying with Leonard Pijatraj, the trainer.
I
But the problem
would
he would
love
have
to
against
see that fight.
Hrgovic, yeah, Yeah, so would I. So would I. But the problem he would have against Hrgovic is that he's just so much bigger, and I
If
don't
we could
know.
do the
He's
build
not
up for that
Usyk, is he,
fight,
Babic?
no. If we could do the build up
That's
for
the
that
problem.
fight and then someone gets ill on the day, just as, like a cold, that would be ideal. I think that's all we need. We don't even need to see the fight because I don't think I see anything other than Hrgovic sparking him out because
He's just too. He's just far too big for him. He's far too
too
big
big,
for him,
too
and that
strong.
is the problem he's going to have. Well, who knows what will happen with Babic? Maybe he will step up and get a fight against a good level, really good level heavyweight who outweighs him by 2 or 3 stone, and he'll take a bit of a beating, and he'll think to himself, you know what? I could still box at cruiser or bridgerweight with the WBC. Why don't I just do that? Common sense has to take over at some point. So
I
it's not
don't think
like
so. I
that
don't think
option.
there is much when it comes.
But but that option's always there for him. He could always do it. He could always do it. But good luck to him because he's putting himself out there to be shot at. And I've got all the time in the world for every fighter. It's um, they've all got massive courage, obviously, to get in there in the first place. But when you're prepared to really talk the talk, you then have to try and back it up. And that's all he's trying to do. That's all he's trying to do. He just wants to entertain and fight.
I,
He lives for it, doesn't he? He lives for it. He's obsessed with it.
the best thing it was on last night that he came on and I think he was doing an open workout with Sky and he was doing the pads and even doing the pads he doesn't take a backward step ever ever even like he's doing the pads and they get to the ropes and the trainer has to turn around so that he could keep walking forward because he just doesn't know he just doesn't ever go backwards and I just
No,
someday he's
that's it.
got to get sparked out surely.
Team White like to talk about maximum violence, don't they? That's their
Yeah.
kind of buzz phrase. And Babic is 100% in that category. And somebody suggested to me on Twitter today when Sky put up this tweet about Alan Babbage being upset with the wrong Andy because he's Andy Scott, and then they kind of suggested it was me, and I kind of played along with it. Somebody said to me, "Oh, you should get on the body belt with Babbage," because I did it with Dillian White, but Dillian White took it very easy and maybe kind of crapped me with one that was about 30-40% maybe. I
If
wouldn't
that,
fancy it
yeah.
with Babbage. I wouldn't fancy it with Babbage, even if I was assured that he knew that this was just a bit of fun, because I don't think he's capable of doing that. I think he would see me standing in front of him as the target to hit, and I think he would let me have it.
He would go, I
Um,
am the savage, and he would just start going for you.
yeah, it'd be terrifying. It'd be absolutely terrifying because he just comes to fight, And as soon as he gets into that ring, uh, whether it's training, whether it's pads, whatever it is, he just wants to bring it to the max, and that's what you'll get from him. You'll get that from him every single time he gets in there, for
the
better or worse.
the best thing about the press conference today was he's angry. It's like he's released the savage because Tom Little mentioned Hrgovic. He said that if I beat Babic, I'm gonna I'm gonna celebrate and then say that Hrgovic is better than him. And he hates Hrgovic that much that he's just now fuming with Tom Little and what I want to knock him out in one round. He's like a Terminator, isn't he?
Yeah, he was properly riled up by that. No question. No question. I've lost you, mate. I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, I got
Yeah,
you back.
cool. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to get off your chest while we're here? Anything else you want to argue about? I'm here for all your arguing needs.
Not really. I mean, I've been bemused by this whole Deontay Wilder situation because I just thought at some point he would stop. He would stop with the excuses. I thought, is there nobody around him who can just say to him, Deontay, enough. Like this has got to stop now. Because the latest one was that wasn't he claiming that Fury somehow managed to scratch the inside of his ear with his
That
fingernails through his
and
through his glove? I mean,
that his water
What's
got
going on?
spiked as well.
Yeah, it's just absolutely crazy. I mean, obviously Fury's not going to fight now against Cabile on December the 5th. I don't think anybody's too worried about that.
I
And
wouldn't have
you
wanted to
know,
pay 20 quid to watch that fight.
but Tyson Fury's WBC World Heavyweight Champion, so when he fights, I think it's fair enough that you would want to put it on
Yeah, but
pay
I
per
mean,
view.
like
But they
against
just
Caballero, like I've got
but
no
he's at that
interest in
level,
watching
Fury,
that
though, isn't
fight.
he? And it's just a mark time fight. But maybe that third fight with Wilder will have to happen. I've no idea what the contractual situation with it is, whether there was a time limit on the rematch clause, which obviously with the pandemic, unless you've got that written in there somewhere, like force majeure or whatever it's called, then that could play a part. But they do seem to want it, Wilder's team, and a third fight
And
between we all want to see AJ against Fury. Obviously, we want to see Anthony Joshua beat Pulev, and then those two fight. But I suspect it might be a little way away yet, because if he has to fight Wilder again, he has to fight him again. And it's not like I wouldn't want to see that, because I'd be fascinated to see what Wilder comes back in the ring, because I mean that's the manner of that defeat when you're previously undefeated. I don't know how you
I think it's still a
all
good
this stuff
fight.
he's coming out with. Yeah, I mean, it's still very interesting, isn't it?
I love watching Deontay Wilder, even after he got absolutely battered by Fury, because I still think no matter what, there can always be one moment. And it was the Luis Ortiz fight was so exciting because he was getting beaten, and we all just knew at some point he's gonna land. But then in the back of your mind, there's always that thought: what if he doesn't land? And it's just so exciting to watch because like when I watch heavyweight boxing, literally, like I don't even feel my legs anymore because it's like I know that there's a human who's just about to be laid out on the floor. Not always, but chances are someone's going to be
Yeah,
laid out.
there is nothing like it. There is nothing like it. Like Madison Square Garden was just the most electric night, and I know it wasn't what we were expecting, but just watching it happen, just unfold a few feet away from you, and what always strikes you about it, like I said earlier, is just how small that ring looks when you've got two huge units in there, and with heavyweights they can look invincible, they can look so powerful, but then when they get hurt, they look more vulnerable than any other fighter you will see, just because of the sheer size of them and the way they go down when they get put down. It's so dramatic. We saw it with Povetkin against Dillian White over the summer, and it's just it is the kind of situation where anything can happen at any time. And I like Wilder too. I could live without some of the things he says at times about bodies on records
Uh,
and things
but
like that, but
I
it's
still
not
do
like he
think,
said it all the time.
yeah, the bodies thing I agree with, but I do think like even these excuses, it's building the fight. Like you can't deny that it's in a roundabout way, it's getting more eyeballs on the fight and it's building it. And I would rather he was saying something than saying nothing because it just all builds up to the narrative. It creates narrative, and that's the difference. The people who stay silent, who don't make the stories or the news or whatever, like we don't get
Yeah,
to
I
see
mean,
what the narrative of the fights are.
even though I've criticised him for the things that he said, I don't really like a good loser. I prefer it when fighters um, react badly to defeat. They have to try and square it with themselves somehow. They have to try and explain it to themselves somehow, particularly if they've never lost before. And he hadn't, obviously. And although he's gone very much to the bizarre end of the spectrum with the things that he said, I like a bad loser, because they should be bad losers. They're professional
Fox
fighters.
grows. That's why it's so
Yeah,
good.
the pride and machismo involved is off the scale, and that makes them what they are. And we would all like to see AJ Fury next if Joshua beats Pulev, but I would still be very interested in the third fight between Wilder and Fury, because you just cannot rule Wilder out of any fight. And I do like fighters too who are just kind of pure pro fighters, in that they're always looking for the knockout. The most
Yeah.
redundant phrase in boxing is the scorecards at the time of the knockout were. And people can talk all they want about Luis Ortiz oh, he won every round, but he got knocked out. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
That's
that happens so often. It's like people saying like, I suppose like the Canelo Kovalev is like, it's all well and good saying Kovalev won most of those early rounds, but like he got
he
knocked
knocked him out. He bided
out.
his time and he knocked him out. We saw a really good one in the summer in fight camp with Eric Donovan and Zelfa Barrett. Donovan, really experienced amateur, very, very good amateur, got to a really good level, very good boxer. And then you got Zelfa Barrett, who was bred for professional boxing, like turned professional young. Pat Barron is his trainer. He's a pure professional boxer, and he's always looking to try and knock you out. He's got more to him than that, but that's what he's looking to do, and that's what he did that night in the end. And after the fight, he was a bit down on himself, saying, "Oh, but it didn't really go." But he got there. He got there. He made the adjustments, and he knocked him out. And that's what it's about. If you've got the ability to do that, then you are putting yourself under a lot of pressure, knowing that maybe you're going to lose rounds and lose rounds and lose rounds. You need to keep the faith that at some point you will just land that one shot. And Wilder very nearly did it in that first fight against Fury. I mean, he thought he had done it, didn't he? He started celebrating. I thought he'd done it. We all thought he'd done it, and then Fury somehow managed to get
It,
up. I mean, it just makes it so dramatic.
the second fight for me shows that every single one of us was completely wrong about what we thought the right tactics were to beat Deontay Wilder, because I think anyone would be lying if they said the tactic to beat Wilder wasn't to get on the back foot, box the sweet science, come in and out, sort of the Usyk style, I suppose. Everyone would have said that's the way to beat him, but Fury just completely flipped the
Yeah,
switch, and it
yeah. I
shows
mean that.
his tactics in the first fight were all wrong to an extent.
I mean it just that that was what was so impressive about it, because what he did against Wilder in the first fight, we all knew that he could do that,
Yeah,
and that was how he generally fights. Could he do it against Wilder? Different question. He did, although he was a split second away from being counted out.
I
Most
still
people
think it
felt that
was
he should
10
have.
seconds.
Yeah,
I
most
think it
people
was
felt he
more.
should have got it. He should have got it on the cards. But to then go away and think, most fighters would have gone away and just thought, well, I deserve to win that fight. Everybody agrees that really I won that fight. So there's the
This is what we
blueprint.
should
I'll
have
just do that
debated
again.
about, because
But
I
he didn't.
told.
But he didn't, did he?
Yeah.
He went to the Kronk. He changed training team. Um, got Sugar Hill involved, got Andy Lee involved, and he said, "I'm going to go and knock him out." I didn't believe him. Most people didn't believe him, and then he did it. And at the end of that, I just thought, "Wow, this guy can do it all." He can do it all, and that really, for me, it's that performance against Wilder that makes him the man to beat, because just the all round package there with Fury is, as long as mentally he's in the right place, and they need to try and keep him fighting to achieve that. I think, um, yeah, it was breathtaking stuff, and that's what makes the heavyweight so dramatic. Even fights that actually in the end turn out to be quite dull, like the rematch between Joshua and Ruiz, it was
It
incredibly
was so
tense.
boring.
It was
It was just the
incredibly tense
narrative,
though to
wasn't it?
watch it. Yeah, just to watch it at ringside was so tense, because if he hadn't won that fight, then it was difficult to see where he would go. Really, Anthony, he was under enormous pressure, and he got it done. And
It was
yeah,
so
not a
good
lot
to.
really happened,
It was
but at
fun
the
to
same
watch at the
time, I was
time.
absolutely glued to it.
It was fun to
Yeah,
watch at
you
the
wouldn't
time, but
watch
I
it
would never
back.
watch it again. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly, it's one of those fights you wouldn't watch it again, but at the time, you got sucked into it 100%.
I have to say, before we go, I believe that it's the Wilder Fury first fight. I think that the draw was fair, and because I know that if you score it round by round, you'd probably quite easily give it to Fury. But I just think when you look at it as a 12-round fight, and the fact that Wilder was that close to knocking him out, and he knocked him down twice, I think that the outcry about it being a draw was exaggerated. I do think a draw was fair, just because Fury was half a second. A less generous referee would have counted him out.
Yeah, that's Yeah, that's true. And referee Jack Reese got a lot of props for not waving it off because he was lying on his back with his eyes shut. But then a few weeks later, he got heavily criticised for not stopping, I think, Lomachenko Crawler earlier. So it's different days produce different kinds of verdicts. But I mean, with the scores for that fight, there was a 114, 112, if I remember correctly, which translated basically to 116, 112 without the to 8-4 in rounds to Fury, and that's what I had. But Phil Edwards is 113, 113. I didn't have a massive problem with that because that's 7 rounds to 5 in favour of Fury. Finding 5 rounds for Wilder in that fight, some of those early rounds, really not very much happened. It
Yeah,
really didn't. So if it had been a majority draw, if we'd got two 113, 113s, I think people would have found that a lot easier to accept. I think it was the 115, 111 from Alejandro Rochin, which gives 7 rounds to Wilder. I think people looked at that and just thought, hang on a second. And I was one of them because I don't see how you could find 7 rounds there, two of them being 10-8, obviously, for Deontay Wilder. I just didn't. But if we'd had two draws and ended up with a majority draw, I think people would have looked at that and thought, actually, yeah, maybe. But as it was that I think it was that one card in Wilder's favour where people just found that to
bit
be a bit
shocking.
too
Yeah.
much of a stretch.
Unbelievably, our ugly mugs have had a comment on Twitch, but it's from my friend. So it's it makes better TV too. I think Jazz is referring to the fact that the narratives that are created definitely makes better TV, as we discussed earlier. Yeah, like do you know what I actually think about Deontay is that I think his biggest error was going into he had the Brazil and the Ortiz fight, and he almost convinced himself that he was so good that there's no way Fury's not getting knocked out. And I think had he had maybe even if he took like a Dillian White fight and beat Dillian White, he would have been much better prepared to go and fight Tyson Fury. But I think because he had those two fights where he literally just stood there. I mean, against Ortiz, he didn't even try to box. He was just looking for the right hand, and I think that just because he did try to box in the first fight with Tyson Fury, but then he never tried in the second fight. And I just think that he almost tricked himself that he was even more powerful than he is.
Yeah, I think the fight against Ortiz would possibly have led to some overconfidence because Ortiz is a very good technical boxer and he won every round and then he knocked him out. And you got 36 minutes to knock somebody out if you're Deontay Wilder, and it's always worked before, and it worked against a very technically skilled fighter and a big unit as well in Ortiz. And like I said before, I absolutely think that they took that fight against Fury because he'd had the two comebacks and didn't look great, which was to be expected. Really, he'd been out for such a long time. I think they thought this is the time to get him, and I think they thought that they would walk through him. To be honest, I really do. And when they didn't, but they saw enough in that first fight to think that the second time they would
He
still
would
be
be
able
able.
to do it, and they were
Do you
wrong.
think, looking back, good or bad business for Wilder to turn down AJ and to fight Fury?
I think it's bad business because at that point it would have been a fight for all the marbles, wouldn't it? For all the belts, and that's what everybody wants to see. I was listening to Bunsey on. I've heard him say this a few times actually on the Five Live pod that Wilder and Joshua were champions for something like 3 years, 3 years plus, and never fought each other. And when you look at that, it's not great, is it? I mean, when the negotiations started the first time, I didn't really see them working. That first round, I didn't think that would work because
I don't think the first
it's
round
almost a
rarely
feeling.
works ever.
Yeah, it's almost a feeling out process, isn't it? Who's going to give what ground in which areas and all the rest of it. And nobody wants to give 50-50. And Eddie's obviously never going to want to agree to 50-50 because he feels that Joshua is a much bigger draw. And then Wilder's people are going to say the same thing. And then they'll kind of learn from those. And then maybe the second time around, they can make it happen. So yeah, I mean, it was a shame because they booked those two dates at Wembley, did one for Povetkin, and then had that one in April, wasn't it? Which in the end they didn't end up using because they ended up going to America. But then last year we just got this incredible drama that we weren't expecting, and it's just a brilliant example of what we always say, which is that in that division anything can happen, because we were looking at a relatively dull year, to be honest, because Fury was doing his thing in America with Top Rank, which I think was a good idea, introducing him to the American audience. They put loads into that, had those fights against Schwartz and Wallin. Joshua looked like he was going to fight Ruiz and beat him, and then who's he going to fight after that? And no one was really particularly sure. Would it be a mandatory? Just didn't really look that exciting, to be honest. And then all of a sudden, something that nobody expected happened, and the end of the year was, we all ended up in Saudi Arabia, and that's definitely not what we thought was going to happen when we arrived in New York in late May.
It's a roller coaster. Andy, thank you very much for joining me. Next time you come on, I'm looking for like the 5 topics that we actually properly disagree on, because we've agreed.
I'm sure we could find them.
I've got to find something to really rile you up, and you can rile me up, and then we can really get going. Thanks a lot for joining me. And
no problem.
My plan is to do this every Thursday and Sunday, so hopefully people will start tuning in. But we're slow start, and we're on the road now, so
we're away. We're away.
Yeah, we're away. Exactly. I will catch up with you soon, and thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back again with another big boxing debate very, very soon. Thanks for watching.